I am Cassandra Miller, 27 years old, and for most of my life, my family thought I was just lazy. The mysterious pain that plagued me since my teenage years was dismissed as excuses, attention-seeking, or simply a lack of motivation. I never imagined that one day, my diagnosis would save my sister Brianna, the same sister who stood silently by while our mother told me to just get over it. Sometimes life has a way of bringing things full circle in the most unexpected ways. If you are watching this from somewhere where chronic illness is misunderstood, drop your location in the comments, hit subscribe, and join me as I share how my greatest pain became my family's only hope. As a child, I was always full of energy. I climbed trees, played soccer, and ran around our neighborhood in Oakville with boundless enthusiasm. My mother would often comment on how she had to practically drag me inside when the streetlights came on. I was the kid who never wanted the day to end, always begging for 5 more minutes outside. My father would ruffle my hair and call me his little firecracker. Those memories feel like they belong to someone else now. Everything changed when I turned 15. The fatigue hit first, not the normal teenage tiredness that comes from growth spurts and staying up too late. This was different. It felt like someone had replaced my blood with lead. I would wake up after 10 hours of sleep feeling like I hadn't slept at all. Then came the joint pain. My knees and elbows ached constantly, especially in the mornings. Some days I could barely make it down the stairs for breakfast. The brain fog was the most frustrating symptom. Words would escape me mid-sentence. I would forget what I was doing halfway through a task. School became an exercise in frustration. My parents took me to our family doctor after I fell asleep during final exams. Dr. Peterson listened for about 5 minutes before declaring it was just growing pains and stress from school. He suggested more sleep, less screen time, and regular exercise. My mother nodded along, seemingly relieved to have such a simple explanation. For a few weeks, they were concerned. My mom made me vitamin smoothies and let me go to bed early. My dad brought home pamphlets about teen stress management. But when my symptoms didn't improve despite following every suggestion, their concern turned to skepticism. "You were fine last week when Amanda invited you to the mall," my mother said one morning when I could barely get out of bed. There was an edge to her voice that hadn't been there before. "That was different," I tried to explain. "I had rested all day before that." My mother pursed her lips. "You need to push through it, Cassie. Everyone gets tired." That was the beginning of the shift. My mother, Linda Miller, had always been a woman who valued productivity and resilience. She worked 50-hour weeks as a real estate agent and still managed to cook dinner most nights. In her world, exhaustion was something you powered through with another cup of coffee and sheer willpower. My father, Robert, was more passive. He didn't openly accuse me of anything, but he deferred to my mother in all things related to my health. "Your mother knows best," he would say, effectively removing himself from the conversation. As my condition worsened, my younger sister Brianna seemed to thrive. Just 2 years younger than me, she was everything I had been before my symptoms started. She got straight, as was captain of the volleyball team, and never complained about being tired or in pain. My parents, especially my mother, began to hold her up as an example. "Look at your sister," became a common refrain in our house. "She manages to get everything done, and she has just as much on her plate as you do." The family dynamic shifted dramatically. Family dinners became a celebration of Brianna's accomplishments and a subtle indictment of my failures. My father would ask Brianna about her day while barely making eye contact with me. My mother would serve me smaller portions, as if I hadn't earned the right to the same meal as everyone else because I hadn't been productive. The summer I turned 16, we took our annual family vacation to Lake Tahoe. I had been looking forward to it for months, hoping the change of scenery might help me feel better. The first day, my family wanted to hike to Eagle Falls. I knew it would be too much for me, but I tried anyway. Halfway up the trail, my knees were screaming in pain, and I was so dizzy I had to sit down. "We are almost there," my mother said, irritation clear in her voice. "Everyone else can make it." I can't, I said, fighting back tears. I need to go back. My father looked at his watch. I will take her back to the cabin, he said to my mother. You and Brianna go ahead. I could see the disappointment in his eyes as he silently walked me back down the trail. When my mother and Brianna returned hours later, glowing with excitement about the waterfall and the pictures they had taken, my mother didn't even try to hide her frustration. You know what your problem is, Cassie? She said as she unpacked her backpack. You are just lazy and looking for attention. You have been doing this since you were 15, and I am tired of planning our lives around your excuses. The words hit me like a physical blow. Brianna looked uncomfortable but said nothing in my defense. My father busied himself with the cabin's fireplace, pretending not to hear. That night, alone in my room, I cried until I had no tears left. I knew something was wrong with my body. I could feel it, but I was beginning to wonder if maybe they were right. Maybe I was just weak. Maybe I was looking for attention. Maybe I was lazy. That was the first time I considered that perhaps the problem wasn't my body, but my mind. It wouldn't be the last. High school became a battleground where I fought not just my mysterious symptoms, but also the growing perception that I was simply not trying hard enough. I had always been a good student, but now assignments went incomplete, and test scores plummeted, despite hours of studying through the brain fog. My GPA dropped from a 3.8 to a 2.5 in a single semester. The guidance counselor called my parents in for a meeting. Cassandra is showing signs of depression, Miss Wilson said gently. Many teenagers struggle with the pressure of high school. I would recommend a mental health evaluation. My mother latched onto this explanation immediately. It was more acceptable than laziness, perhaps, but still placed the blame squarely on me rather than on any physical condition. We saw a psychiatrist who prescribed antidepressants after a 45-minute session. They didn't help with the pain or fatigue, but my parents could now attribute my struggles to a diagnosed mental health issue that was being treated. Friends gradually drifted away. It is hard to maintain friendships when you cancel plans last minute because your body won't cooperate. Jessica and Alicia, my best friends since elementary school, tried to understand at first. They would bring me homework when I missed school and sit with me at lunch, even when I was too tired to contribute much to the conversation. But by junior year, their patience wore thin. You never come to anything anymore, Jessica said after I canceled on her birthday party. We get that you are going through stuff, but it feels like you do not even try. I am trying, I insisted, but the words sounded hollow even to me. How could I explain what I didn't understand myself? Only Mrs. Garcia, my English teacher, seemed to truly see me. She noticed how I would grip my desk when the pain flared, how my eyelids would droop not from boredom, but from overwhelming fatigue. Have you been to a rheumatologist? She asked one day after class. When I looked confused, she explained that her sister had lupus, an autoimmune disease with symptoms similar to mine. Sometimes it takes specialists to find the right answers, she said kindly. I brought this up to my mother, who dismissed it immediately. You do not have lupus, Cassie. You have depression and a tendency to catastrophize. Mrs. Garcia should stick to teaching English. My first serious boyfriend, Jake, was initially understanding. We started dating during senior year, and he did not mind the quiet dates watching movies instead of going to parties. He would hold my hand through pain flares and drive me home early without complaint, but after a year, even his patience waned. I feel like I am dating an old lady, he said during our last fight. We never do anything fun. You are only 22 years old, but live like you are 80. I couldn't even argue with him. He deserved someone who could hike with him, dance all night, travel without calculating proximity to bathrooms and rest stops. We broke up a week before I attempted to start community college. College was a disaster from the start. Even with a reduced course load, I couldn't keep up. The walking between classes exhausted me. The long lectures were torture for my body and my foggy brain. I dropped out after one semester, moving back home in defeat. The tension at home escalated to new heights. Brianna was thriving at UCLA, double majoring in economics and political science while maintaining a social life and internship. Every phone call home was another opportunity for my mother to draw comparisons. "Brianna is managing 19 credits and a part-time job," she would say, not even attempting to hide the subtext. "Why can't you do even a fraction of that?" My father had retreated further into emotional absence. He would come home from his accounting job, eat dinner while asking Brianna about her studies over the phone, and then disappear into his home office until bedtime. Occasionally, when my mother's criticism became particularly harsh, he would attempt peacekeeping with weak statements like, "Let's have a nice dinner without bringing all this up." I tried working at a clothing store at the mall, then as a receptionist, then data entry from home. None lasted more than a few months. The physical demands were too much, and the brain fog made errors common. Each failure reinforced my family's narrative that I simply didn't have the grit or work ethic they valued. The lowest point came during a Sunday dinner when Brianna was home for spring break. She was talking about her internship offer from a prestigious consulting firm when my mother turned to me. "Have you applied for any jobs this week?" she asked, though she already knew the answer. "I am still recovering from the last one," I said quietly, referring to the telemarketing position I had left 2 weeks earlier, after repeatedly forgetting my script mid-call. My mother put down her fork with deliberate calm. "You are fine, Cassie. Just get a job like your sister. The longer you sit around feeling sorry for yourself, the harder it will be to rejoin the real world." Brianna studied her plate intently. My father cleared his throat but said nothing. "I am not fine," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. "Something is wrong with me." "The only thing wrong with you is your attitude," my mother replied. "Everyone has challenges. The difference is, most people don't use them as an excuse to avoid responsibility." I left the table and locked myself in my childhood bedroom. The pattern had become clear. No matter what symptoms I reported, no matter how much pain was evident on my face, my family had decided on their narrative. I was lazy. I was seeking attention. I was weak. The isolation grew complete. I stopped joining family meals when I could avoid them. I retreated into online forums where others described symptoms like mine, finding more understanding from strangers than from my own blood. Depression, the real kind, not just the convenient diagnosis my mother had accepted, settled over me like a heavy blanket. I began to doubt everything about myself. Maybe they were right. Maybe I was just lazy. Maybe if I pushed harder, ignored the pain more effectively, I could be normal, like Brianna. The thought kept me awake at night, along with the ever-present pain in my joints and muscles. Something had to change. I couldn't continue living as a disappointment under my parents' roof. With my next disability check, I made a decision that would alter the course of all our lives. My 24th birthday passed without celebration. Instead of cake and presents, I gave myself the gift of independence. Using the small amount I had saved from disability payments and occasional online work, I put a deposit on a tiny studio apartment across town. It was all I could afford. 300 square feet with a kitchenette, a bathroom where my knees touched the wall when I sat on the toilet, and a mattress on the floor that served as both my bed and my office. But it was mine, and more importantly, it was away from the constant disapproval that hung in my parents' house like a toxic cloud. My mother's parting words were predictably pessimistic. "You will be back in a month when you run out of money or energy to take care of yourself." My father helped me move my few belongings but remained mostly silent, as was his way. Brianna sent a housewarming gift, a small plant with a card saying, "Grow where you are planted." It was the kindest gesture from my family in years. Survival required income, so I leveraged my one marketable skill, my ability to write when the brain fog allowed. I found work as a virtual assistant, taking on small tasks that I could complete during my good hours, which typically came in the afternoon. The pay was minimal, but combined with my disability benefits, it kept the lights on and food in my refrigerator. With physical distance from my family, I could finally focus on finding answers without their skepticism drowning out my instincts. I spent hours researching medical conditions that matched my symptoms. I joined online communities for chronic fatigue, fibromyalgia, lupus, and other autoimmune conditions. For the first time, I found people who understood what I was experiencing without questioning its validity. A woman in one of these forums recommended keeping a detailed symptom journal, tracking everything from pain levels to food intake to sleep quality. Doctors take you more seriously when you come with data, she advised. I took her suggestion to heart, creating spreadsheets and charts tracking my symptoms over time. 3 months into my independent life, I used my meager savings to see Dr. Langford, a rheumatologist with positive reviews from the chronic illness community. Her office was an hour away, and the consultation fee was nearly a month's rent, but I was desperate for answers. Unlike the doctors I had seen previously, Dr. Langford listened, really listened. She asked detailed questions about the progression of my symptoms, my family medical history, and the impact on my daily life. She looked through my symptom journal without a hint of skepticism. "You have been dealing with this for over a decade without proper investigation," she said, her tone a mixture of compassion and professional indignation. "That ends today." What followed was a battery of tests. Blood work that looked at markers I had never heard of, imaging studies, nerve conduction tests, and genetic screenings. Each appointment and test strained my budget to breaking point, but I was determined to find answers, even if it meant eating ramen for dinner every night. 6 weeks and thousands of dollars later, I sat in Dr. Langford's office as she reviewed my results. "Cassandra," she said, using my full name with a gravity that made my heart race, "you have Ehlers-Danlos syndrome, with comorbid postural orthostatic tachycardia syndrome and mast cell activation disorder." I burst into tears, not from fear or sadness, but from vindication. There were names for what I had been experiencing, medical terms that validated the decade of pain and exhaustion. I wasn't crazy. I wasn't lazy. I was sick. Dr. Langford explained that Ehlers-Danlos syndrome, or EDS, was a genetic connective tissue disorder that affected how my body produced collagen. This explained the joint pain and hypermobility I had experienced. The POTS explained my dizziness and fatigue, as my body struggled to maintain proper blood flow when I stood. The mast cell issues explained the seemingly random allergic reactions and inflammation. "Is there a cure?" I asked, already suspecting the answer. "Not a cure, no, doctor," Langford said gently, "but there are treatments that can help manage your symptoms and improve your quality of life. And now that we know what we are dealing with, we can be much more targeted in our approach." She outlined a treatment plan that included physical therapy, medications to control the POTS and mast cell symptoms, dietary changes, and lifestyle modifications. For the first time in years, I felt a flicker of hope, not for a miracle recovery, but for a life where I could function within my limitations without constantly questioning my own experience. Armed with my diagnosis and Dr. Langford's detailed explanation, I decided to share the news with my family. Perhaps now, with medical validation, they would finally understand. I invited them to my small apartment for dinner, spending the entire day cooking despite the pain in my hands and the fatigue threatening to overwhelm me. My parents arrived with Brianna, who was home from graduate school for the weekend. They looked uncomfortable in my small space, my mother glancing with barely concealed disapproval at the mattress on the floor and the second-hand furniture. After a strained meal of spaghetti, the only dish I could afford to make for 4 people, I took a deep breath and shared my diagnosis. I explained each condition in the terms Dr. Langford had used, showing them the medical reports and informational brochures. The response was underwhelming, at best. My mother's lips thinned into a familiar line of skepticism. "Everyone has something these days," she said dismissively. "There are so many of these trendy diagnoses now. In my day, people just dealt with their problems without needing special names for them." My father nodded along, adding unhelpfully, "Well, at least you know what it is now." Brianna at least seemed genuinely interested. asking questions about treatment and prognosis. But even she fell silent when our mother started on her familiar refrain about positive thinking and pushing through challenges. "Do you know how many clients I have worked with who have disabilities?" my mother asked rhetorically. "They still manage to show up and be productive members of society." I felt something snap inside me. Years of dismissal and gaslighting crystallized into a moment of clarity and rage. "This is not about productivity," I said, my voice shaking. "This is about you refusing to believe that I am genuinely ill because it contradicts your narrative about me. I have spent over 10 years being told I am lazy and attention-seeking, when I was actually suffering from a genetic condition that you probably passed down to me." My mother's face flushed with anger. "How dare you blame your problems on genetics? Your sister came from the same genes, and she is perfectly healthy and successful." The irony of her statement would become apparent all too soon, but in that moment it was just another knife to my heart. I asked them to leave, unable to continue the conversation, without breaking down completely. As they filed out of my apartment, I realized that even with a medical diagnosis, some people will choose their comfortable assumptions over uncomfortable truths. The validation I sought would never come from my family. I would need to find it within myself and my newfound medical community. That night, I cried for the support I never had and never would have from the people who were supposed to love me unconditionally. But when the tears dried, a new resolve took their place. I would move forward with my treatment plan. I would build a life within my capabilities, and I would do it without the constant weight of seeking my family's approval or understanding. What I couldn't know then was that life had a cruel twist of fate waiting just around the corner, one that would force my family to confront the reality of my condition in the most unexpected way. For 6 months, I maintained minimal contact with my family, the occasional text message with Brianna, obligatory holiday phone calls with my parents, but nothing substantial. I focused instead on my treatment regimen and building a support network that actually supported me. Physical therapy sessions taught me how to move without further damaging my hypermobile joints. Medication helped regulate my heart rate and blood pressure when standing. Dietary changes reduced my mast cell reactions. I was far from cured, but for the first time since my teenage years, I had tools to manage my symptoms rather than merely endure them. I even made friends through a local support group for people with invisible illnesses. For the first time, I could talk about pain flares or brain fog without seeing that familiar look of disbelief or impatience. These friends understood canceling plans last minute because your body betrayed you. They got it. Then came the call that changed everything. It was a Tuesday afternoon in October. I was working on a virtual assistant task when my phone displayed my father's number. Dad rarely called me directly, so immediately I knew something was wrong. "Cassie," his voice cracked in a way I had never heard before. "It is Brianna. She collapsed at work. We are at Memorial Hospital. The doctors are running tests." Despite everything, despite the years of dismissal and hurt, my heart dropped to my stomach. "I will be right there," I said, without hesitation. I called a rideshare despite the expense, my hands shaking so badly I could barely use my phone. The 20-minute ride to the hospital felt like hours. My mind raced through possibilities, each more frightening than the last. When I arrived at the hospital, I found my parents in the emergency waiting room. My mother looked like she had aged 10 years overnight, her usually perfect makeup streaked with tears. My father paced the small area, his normally stoic face drawn with worry. Neither seemed surprised to see me. In crisis, family closes ranks, even dysfunctional ones like ours. "What happened?" I asked, sitting beside my mother who, for once, seemed too distracted to criticize me. "She was giving a presentation at work," my father explained. "Halfway through, she just collapsed. Her colleagues called an ambulance. They said she was complaining about joint pain and dizziness all week but pushed through it for this big client meeting." The description sent a chill through me. It sounded eerily familiar. "A doctor eventually came to speak with us. directing us to a private consultation room. Dr. Reyes was a neurologist with kind eyes and a direct manner. "Brianna is stable," she assured us first. "But the preliminary tests show some concerning results. Has anyone in your family been diagnosed with connective tissue disorders?" 3 pairs of eyes turned to me. I swallowed hard before answering. "I have Ehlers-Danlos syndrome with POTS and MCAS." Dr. Reyes nodded, unsurprised. "Based on our initial evaluation, Brianna shows many of the same symptoms. We are running genetic tests to confirm, but the presentation is classic for EDS. Unfortunately, her case appears to be more severe, with some vascular involvement that is causing additional complications." My mother's face went pale. "That is not possible. Brianna has always been healthy. She was just tired from working too hard." Dr. Reyes's expression was compassionate but firm. "Mrs. Miller, EDS is a genetic condition. It can manifest differently even within families, and symptoms often worsen with age and stress. From what we can gather, Brianna has been experiencing symptoms for months but attributed them to work, stress, and pushed through. Just like I had been told to do for years. The immediate concern," Dr. Reyes continued, "is that Brianna's vascular involvement has caused inflammation in her bone marrow, severely compromising her immune system. She needs a bone marrow transplant relatively soon to prevent further complications." The room went silent as the gravity of the situation sank in. "We will need to test immediate family members for compatibility," Dr. Reyes explained. "Siblings often provide the best match." My parents agreed to be tested along with me, though Dr. Reyes warned that parents are rarely perfect matches. We each provided blood samples and were told to return the following day for results. I spent that night in the hospital cafeteria, unable to leave, even though Brianna remained unconscious and visiting hours had ended. My parents eventually went home to shower and change, leaving me alone with my tangled emotions. Worry for my sister competed with a bitter sense of vindication. The condition they had dismissed for years had now struck their perfect child, and suddenly it was real and serious. The next afternoon, we gathered again in the consultation room. Dr. Reyes entered with Brianna's primary physician, Dr. Thompson. Their solemn expressions sent a wave of fear through me. "We have the compatibility results," Dr. Thompson said without preamble. "Neither parent is a suitable match, which is not unusual. However," he turned to me, "Cassandra, you are a near-perfect match for your sister." The air in the room seemed to evaporate. My mother made a small sound, somewhere between a gasp and a sob. My father's face went completely blank, a defense mechanism I recognized all too well. "What does that mean exactly?" I asked, my voice steadier than I felt. "It means you are Brianna's best hope," Dr. Thompson explained. "The procedure would involve harvesting stem cells from your bone marrow and transplanting them to Brianna. It is not without risks for you, especially given your own condition, but it could save your sister's life." I looked at my parents, really looked at them, and saw the moment they realized the cosmic irony of the situation. The daughter they had dismissed and belittled for years was now the only person who could save their golden child. Their faces went ghostly white with the recognition. "I need time to think," I said quietly. Dr. Thompson nodded. "Of course. This is a serious decision, but I should tell you that time is a factor. Brianna's condition is deteriorating more rapidly than we initially thought." As we left the consultation room, my mother reached for my arm, a gesture so unfamiliar it startled me. "Cassie?" she began, her voice uncharacteristically tentative. I gently removed my arm from her grasp. "Not now," I said. "I need to process this alone." For the first time I could remember, she didn't argue. She simply nodded, her eyes full of a complicated mix of emotions I couldn't begin to untangle. I left the hospital and walked aimlessly, my mind racing with the weight of the decision before me. The sister who had stood by silently while my parents dismissed my suffering now needed the very body they had told me was just fine. The parents who had called me lazy and attention-seeking now looked at me with desperate hope. Part of me, a small, wounded part I was not proud of, wanted to refuse, to let them experience just a fraction of the helplessness and rejection I had felt for years. But another part knew I could never live with that decision. Despite everything, Brianna was my sister, and now she was fighting the same battle I had fought alone for so many years. As the sun set over the city, I found myself at a crossroads, both literally and figuratively. The decision I made would forever alter not just Brianna's life, but the dynamic of our entire family. The power I suddenly held was as terrifying as it was vindicating. I ended up at Riverside Park, sitting on a bench overlooking the water as the reality of my situation sank in. My phone buzzed repeatedly with texts from my parents, but I silenced it. This decision was too important to make under their influence or pressure. Instead, I called Audrey, a friend from my support group who had become my closest confidant over the past months. "They have got to be kidding," she said, after I explained the situation. "After everything they put you through, they expect you to undergo a painful medical procedure for the golden child? You do not owe them anything, Cassie. Not a single thing." Her indignation on my behalf was validating, but something about her response didn't sit right with me. "It is not about owing them," I said slowly, working through my thoughts as I spoke. "It is about Brianna, and maybe about who I want to be." "Brianna, who stood by while your mother called you lazy for years? That Brianna?" Audrey's tone was sharp with protective anger. "Yes," I admitted. "But also the Brianna who used to braid my hair before school, who snuck into my room with ice cream after bad doctor appointments, before things got so twisted." My mind drifted to childhood memories that had been overshadowed by years of resentment. Brianna and I building elaborate blanket forts in the living room, teaching each other hand, clapping games on long car rides. The way she would save the marshmallows from her Lucky Charms for me because she knew they were my favorite. When had that sisterhood fractured? Was it when my mysterious symptoms appeared? Or when our parents began their campaign of comparison? Had Brianna chosen to become their favorite? Or had she simply been swept along by the family dynamic, too young to question it? I called another friend, James, who brought a different perspective. "Forgiveness is not about absolving them," he said thoughtfully. "It is about freeing yourself. Whatever you decide about the transplant, you might find that letting go of the resentment is the most healing thing you could do for yourself." Easy to say, harder to practice. But his words stayed with me as night fell, and I finally returned to my small apartment. I barely had time to take off my shoes when a knock came at my door. My mother stood in the hallway, looking smaller somehow than I remembered. For a woman who had always commanded every room she entered, she seemed diminished, uncertain. "May I come in?" she asked, a question rather than the demand I was accustomed to. I hesitated, but stepped aside. She entered my apartment with none of the judgmental glances from her previous visit. Instead, she looked around as if seeing it for the first time, noticing the adaptations I had made for my condition, the ergonomic chair at my desk, the stool in the kitchen so I could sit while cooking, the pill organizer on the counter. "You have made this work for you," she said softly, and I wasn't sure if she meant the apartment or my life with EDS. "I had to," I replied. "No one else was going to do it for me." The words hung between us, heavy with unspoken accusations. My mother sat on my second-hand couch, her normally perfect posture slumped with exhaustion. "Brianna woke up briefly," she said. "She is asking for you." I remained standing, needing the physical advantage. "Is that why you are here? To convince me to help her?" My mother looked up, her eyes red-rimmed from crying. "Yes," she admitted, "but also to," she faltered, the words seemingly stuck in her throat, "to apologize." Of all the things I had expected her to say, that wasn't one of them. I stared at her, searching for the manipulation or condition that surely accompanied such an unprecedented statement. "I was wrong," she continued when I didn't respond. "About your condition, about you. I see that now." "Because Brianna has it?" I couldn't keep the bitterness from my voice. It took your favorite daughter getting the same diagnosis for you to believe it is real? Yes, she said simply, the admission shocking in its honesty. And that is unforgivable, I know. But seeing her collapse, hearing the doctors describe what she has been silently enduring, it was like listening to everything you tried to tell us for years, everything I dismissed. I felt years of pent-up anger and hurt rising to the surface. Do you have any idea what it was like? To be in pain every day and be told it was all in my head? To watch you praise Brianna for pushing through while telling me I was just lazy? Do you know what that does to a person? My voice rose with each question, years of suppressed rage finally finding its target. You made me doubt my own reality. You made me think I was crazy or weak or just seeking attention. You have no idea how many times I thought about ending it all because I couldn't stand the pain and I couldn't stand your disappointment. My mother flinched as if I had struck her. Cassie, I never meant. You never meant what? To destroy my self-worth? To make me feel like a burden? What exactly didn't you mean to do, Mom? The dam had broken. Years of carefully contained emotions flooded out in a torrent I couldn't control. I told her everything. How her words had cut deeper than any physical pain. How my father's silence had been its own form of rejection. How watching Brianna become the daughter they wanted had broken something fundamental in our sisterhood. I expected her to defend herself, to counter with the rational explanations and dismissals that had been her standard response to my pain. Instead, she crumpled before my eyes, her body shaking with sobs. You are right, she managed between gasps. All of it. I failed you. I was so afraid that something was seriously wrong that I convinced myself it was nothing. I told myself I was helping you by pushing you to be stronger, but I was just protecting myself from facing the truth. Her raw honesty stopped me mid-rant. This wasn't the mother I knew, the woman who always had an answer, who never admitted weakness or fault. When Brianna collapsed, she continued, all I could think was, not her too. And then I realized what that meant about how I had treated you. That I had somehow decided you were expendable in a way she wasn't. What kind of mother does that make me? The question hung in the air between us. Not rhetorical, but genuinely searching. For the first time, my mother was looking to me for answers rather than the other way around. A human one, I said finally. A flawed one. We sat in silence for several minutes. The weight of unspoken years between us. Not resolved, not forgiven, but acknowledged at last. I do not expect you to help Brianna because of me, my mother said eventually. I have no right to ask anything of you, but she is still your sister, and she is scared. I thought about Brianna, lying in a hospital bed, facing the same uncertain future I had confronted alone. Despite everything, I couldn't wish that isolation on her. I will talk to her, I said. But I need you to understand something. If I do this, it is not for you or Dad. It is for Brianna, and it doesn't erase the past. My mother nodded, a new respect in her eyes that I had never seen before. I understand, and Cassie, no matter what you decide, we need to do better by you. I need to do better. It wasn't enough, not nearly enough to heal the wounds of a decade. But it was a beginning, fragile and uncertain as a new seedling. The next morning, I went to the hospital alone. Brianna was awake, pale and diminished against the white hospital sheets. Her eyes widened when she saw me, a complex mix of emotions playing across her face. Cassie, she whispered, her voice weak. You came. I sat beside her bed, taking in the IV lines, the monitors, the visible evidence of the invisible illness we shared. Of course I came. You are my sister. Tears filled her eyes. I am so sorry, she said. For everything. For not standing up for you when Mom and Dad dismissed your symptoms. For accepting their narrative that you were just not trying hard enough. I knew something was wrong, but it was easier to believe them than to face what that might mean. I had imagined this conversation so many times. Brianna finally acknowledging the hurt I had carried alone. But seeing her so vulnerable, fighting the same battle I had fought for years, I found the vindication tasted bitter rather than sweet. Did you know you were having symptoms too? I asked. Before you collapsed? She nodded slightly. For about a year. Joint pain, exhaustion, heart palpitations. But I remembered how Mom and Dad reacted to you, so I hid it, pushed through like they always praised me for doing. The irony would have been funny if it wasn't so tragic. And look where that got you, I said softly. The doctors told me you are a match, she said after a moment, that you could help me. But Cassie, I would understand if you didn't want to, after everything. I looked at my sister, really looked at her. Not the perfect daughter who had been held up as my antithesis for years, but the scared young woman facing a diagnosis that had derailed my own life. Despite everything, I knew what my answer would be. Not from obligation, not from family pressure, but from a place of compassion that surprised even me. I will do it, I said simply. Not because I have forgotten, but because no one deserves to face this alone. And because maybe this is how we start to rebuild what we lost. Brianna's tears flowed freely now. I don't deserve your help. This isn't about deserving, I replied. It is about choosing the kind of person I want to be, even when it is hard. Especially when it is hard. As I left Brianna's room, I felt lighter somehow. Not because the pain of the past was erased, but because I had made a choice based on my values rather than my wounds. The road ahead would be difficult, physically and emotionally, but for the first time in years, I felt like I was walking it on my own terms. The weeks that followed were a blur of medical appointments and procedures. Dr. Thompson wasn't exaggerating when he said the bone marrow donation would be challenging for me given my condition. The pre-donation testing alone left me exhausted and in pain, my body rebelling against the additional stress. We need to make sure you are stable enough for the procedure, Dr. Langford explained during one of my appointments. Donating bone marrow is taxing even for someone without EDS. She outlined the risks frankly. The general anesthesia could cause a flare of my symptoms. The extraction procedure itself could be more complicated due to my connective tissue issues. The recovery would likely be longer and more painful than for a typical donor. Are you certain you want to proceed? She asked, her expression serious. Medically, I would advise against it, but I understand this is not just a medical decision. I am certain, I replied, but I appreciate your honesty. My father began appearing at my medical appointments, awkwardly hovering in waiting rooms and offering to drive me home afterward. At first, I found his presence irritating, a too little, too late gesture that felt like obligation rather than support. But gradually, I recognized it for what it was, his attempt at connection in the only way he knew how. After one particularly grueling appointment, he drove me home in silence until we were nearly at my apartment. I failed you, he said suddenly, his eyes fixed firmly on the road ahead. I thought by staying neutral I was keeping the peace, but all I did was abandon you when you needed an advocate. The admission, so unexpected and uncharacteristic from my stoic father, left me momentarily speechless. Why now? I finally asked. What changed? He was quiet for so long I thought he might not answer. When Brianna collapsed, he said eventually, I felt this terror, this helplessness. And I realized that is how you must have felt for years, only without anyone believing you. His hands tightened on the steering wheel. I cannot undo that, but I can try to be different now. For both my daughters, it wasn't a dramatic reconciliation. There were no tears or hugs or sweeping declarations of changed perspectives. But in its own way, it was profound. My father, a man of few words, had offered what he could. It was up to me whether to accept it. Brianna's condition stabilized enough for her to be fully conscious while awaiting the transplant. I visited her daily, our conversations gradually evolving from awkward small talk to more meaningful exchanges. One afternoon, alone in her hospital room, we finally addressed the elephant that had stood between us for years. I was jealous of you, she admitted, surprising me. Growing up, you were always the smart one, the creative one. Everyone said you would do amazing things. Jealous of me? I couldn't hide my disbelief. You were the golden child, the one who could do no wrong. Brianna shook her head slightly. Only after you got sick. Before that, I was just your little sister, always in your shadow. When Mom and Dad started praising me for doing things you couldn't anymore, it felt good at first, like finally being seen. But then it became this pressure to be perfect, to never show weakness. I had never considered this perspective, that Brianna might have been as trapped in our parents' narrative as I was, just from the opposite side. So you hid your symptoms when they started, I said, understanding dawning. I was terrified of disappointing them, she confirmed. Of becoming, she hesitated. Like me, I finished for her. I am sorry, Cassie. I was a coward. I let them treat you terribly because I was afraid the same would happen to me if I showed any cracks. The irony wasn't lost on either of us. Her fear had manifested exactly what she had tried to avoid, and now we were both caught in the same genetic web. We cannot change what happened, I said finally. But maybe we can do better going forward. Be sisters again, not competitors. She reached for my hand, a tentative gesture of connection. I would like that. The day of the donation procedure arrived with surprising swiftness. I was admitted to the hospital the night before, my mother insisting on staying with me despite my protests that I would be fine alone. Please, she said, let me do this one thing right. I relented, more from exhaustion than forgiveness. Throughout the night, as nurses came and went checking vitals and administering pre-procedure medications, I noticed my mother watching me with an expression I couldn't quite place. Not pity, not guilt, but something closer to revelation. What? I finally asked after catching her staring for the third time. I am seeing you, she said simply. Really seeing you, maybe for the first time. How strong you are. How you have managed this condition for years without the support you deserved. Before I could respond, the anesthesiologist arrived to explain the procedure once more and have me sign the final consent forms. The moment passed, but her words stayed with me as I was wheeled into the operating room. I woke hours later in recovery, the familiar pain of my condition amplified by new surgical pain. My mother was there, looking like she hadn't moved the entire time. When she saw I was awake, she didn't bombard me with questions or platitudes as I would have expected. Instead, she simply asked, "What do you need right now?" Such a simple question, but one I couldn't remember her ever asking before. Water, I managed through a dry throat, and my pain medication from home, the hospital stuff makes me nauseated. She nodded and immediately went to advocate with the nurses, returning with both ice water and the approval to use my own medications. It was a small thing, but significant. She was listening to me about my own body, perhaps for the first time. Recovery was grueling, as Dr. Langford had warned. The procedure that might have kept a healthy person in the hospital for a day or two required a week for me. Even after discharge, I was weaker than I had ever been, the donation having depleted my already limited reserves. But Brianna's transplant was successful. Her body accepted my bone marrow without rejection, and gradually her blood counts began to improve. We recovered on different floors of the same hospital, texting when we were too tired for visits, our shared experience of illness creating a bridge across years of estrangement. My mother threw herself into learning about our condition, with the same intensity she had once directed at denying mine. She joined online support groups, ordered medical textbooks, and peppered our doctors with questions at every appointment. At times, her zealous conversion to EDS mom was almost as exhausting as her previous denial, but I recognized it as her way of making amends. My father was more subtle in his transformation. He quietly modified their home to be more accessible for when Brianna was discharged. He researched disability benefits and fought insurance companies on our behalf. He never explicitly apologized again after that day in the car, but his actions spoke of a man determined not to repeat past mistakes. Extended family members who had followed my parents' lead in dismissing my condition now approached with awkward apologies. Aunt Sarah, who once told me to just push through it when I couldn't attend her wedding, now called regularly to check on both me and Brianna. Uncle David, who had joked about my princess and the pea syndrome, sent thoughtful care packages with heating pads and compression gloves. Their sudden concern felt both validating and infuriating. It had taken Brianna's diagnosis to legitimize mine in their eyes, as if one sister's pain was more real than the other's. 3 months after the transplant, we gathered for our first family dinner since the procedures. My mother insisted on hosting at their house rather than a restaurant, so you girls can rest if you need to. The phrasing, acknowledging both our needs without distinction or comparison, did not go unnoticed. The table was set differently than I remembered from previous family dinners. Chairs with proper back support replaced the decorative but uncomfortable dining chairs. The meal was simple, avoiding the trigger foods that both Brianna and I now knew could cause mast cell reactions. Wine glasses sat at every place except ours. Tacit recognition that alcohol was no longer compatible with our medication regimens. As we ate, the conversation flowed more naturally than it had in years. My parents asked questions about my virtual assistant work, showing genuine interest rather than thinly veiled disappointment. Brianna talked about her plans to return to her job part-time, with accommodations for her condition. "I never understood how you managed to keep working through all this," she said to me, admiration clear in her voice. "Even just part-time seems daunting to me right now." "You adapt," I said. "You find new ways to define success." My mother, who once would have bristled at such a redefinition of achievement, simply nodded. "You have been teaching us that for years," she said quietly. "We just weren't ready to learn." It wasn't a perfect dinner. Old patterns occasionally emerged, quickly corrected but still present like muscle memory. My father still defaulted to silence when conversations became emotional. My mother still had to visibly stop herself from making comparisons between us. Brianna and I were still learning how to be sisters rather than rivals. But it was a beginning, a family slowly learning a new way to function, one that accommodated rather than denied the reality of chronic illness. As I left that night, my father hugged me with uncharacteristic emotion. "Thank you," he whispered, "for giving us another chance." I didn't say that I had done it for Brianna, not for them. Some truths still needed time. But I returned the hug, allowing myself to feel the tentative hope of a family finding its way back to each other through the most unexpected of paths. 1 year after the bone marrow transplant, both Brianna and I had settled into what doctors called our new normal. The transplant had successfully treated the vascular complications of her EDS, though the underlying connective tissue disorder remained for both of us. We each had good days and bad days, flares and remissions. The difference now was that neither of us faced them alone. I had expanded my virtual assistant business into a small agency, specifically employing people with chronic illnesses who needed flexible work arrangements. The insight I had gained through years of navigating work with EDS became valuable expertise that I could share with others in similar situations. During a particularly clear-headed period, I created an online resource guide for newly diagnosed EDS patients, compiling the information I had spent years gathering the hard way. Dr. Langford began referring her patients to it, calling it the orientation I wish I could give everyone. What started as a simple document grew into a support group that met monthly in the community room of my apartment building. People of all ages, with invisible illnesses, gathered to share strategies, frustrations, and the unique dark humor that develops when your body becomes unpredictable. "You should have seen the look on this guy's face when my shoulder dislocated during our first date," laughed Teresa, a 32-year-old teacher with EDS. "I just popped it back in and kept eating my pasta." He nearly fainted. These gatherings became a lifeline for many, including Brianna, who initially attended reluctantly at my insistence but soon became a regular. Having spent years hiding her symptoms, she found profound relief in spaces where vulnerability was not just accepted but understood. My mother, to everyone's surprise, including her own, became something of an advocate in her own right. Her real estate business now specialized in helping clients with disabilities find accessible housing. She joined the board of the local EDS Foundation and used her formidable organizational skills to raise awareness and research funds. "I channeled all the energy I used to spend in denial," she explained when interviewed for the foundation newsletter. "Now, I use it to make sure other families don't make the mistakes we did." She had taken to calling me before major foundation decisions, seeking my input and experience. These conversations, once unimaginable, became a regular part of our cautiously rebuilding relationship. My father, true to his nature, showed his evolution more quietly. He renovated his home office into an accessible guest room for when Brianna or I stayed over. He researched and implemented smart home features that made daily tasks easier. His bookshelves, once filled with accounting manuals, now included medical journals and disability rights literature. During one of my regular checkups, Dr. Langford commented on the changes she had observed. "Your family has come a long way," she noted, as she examined my hypermobile joints. "It is not often I see that kind of transformation." "It took a crisis," I acknowledged, "and it is still a work in progress." "Most healing is," she replied wisely. Indeed, the healing was ongoing, not just physically but emotionally. There were still moments when old hurts resurfaced, when a careless word or thoughtless action would trigger memories of years of dismissal. Forgiveness, I was learning, wasn't a single decision but a daily practice. In an unexpected full-circle moment, I received an email from Mrs. Garcia, my high school English teacher who had been the first to suggest I might have an autoimmune condition. She had seen my name in the EDS Foundation newsletter and reached out. "I always knew you were dealing with something real," she wrote. "I am so sorry it took so long for you to be believed, but I am incredibly proud of how you have used your experience to help others." Her validation, coming so many years after those difficult high school days, brought tears to my eyes. I invited her to our next support group meeting, where she shared her sister's story of late-diagnosed lupus and became an honorary member of our chronic illness community. My personal life had evolved as well. After years of avoiding romantic relationships, believing no one would want to take on the complications of my condition, I met Stephen at a disability rights conference. He worked in accessible technology design and understood chronic illness from both professional and personal perspectives, as his mother had multiple sclerosis. Our relationship developed slowly, with open communication about my limitations and needs. On our third date, I had a pain flare that would have once sent me into a spiral of apologies and shame. Instead, I simply told him I needed to reschedule. "No problem," he responded. "Would you like company while you rest, or would you prefer space?" That simple question, acknowledging both my condition and my agency, told me everything I needed to know about his character. 6 months into our relationship, he remained attentive without being patronizing, supportive without trying to fix what couldn't be fixed. The most profound change, however, was within myself. The anger and bitterness that had once defined my relationship with my body and my family had gradually transformed into something more complex but ultimately more peaceful. I still had days when I raged against the limitations of my condition, but they no longer consumed me. At a family gathering, celebrating both Brianna's and my birthdays, my mother raised her glass in a toast. "To my daughters," she said, her voice thick with emotion, "who taught me that strength isn't about pushing through pain, but about facing it honestly. Who showed me that family means accepting each other as we are, not as we wish each other to be." Brianna and I exchanged glances, a wordless acknowledgement of how far we had all come. The sister who had once been held up as my antithesis was now my closest ally in navigating our shared condition. The parents who had dismissed my suffering for years now structured family events around our energy limitations. It wasn't perfect. Nothing involving family ever is, but it was real. This new understanding we had forged through crisis and reconciliation. Later that evening, as guests were leaving, my father pulled me aside. "I have been thinking," he said, characteristic uncertainty in his voice, "about starting a college fund for EDS research. In your name." The gesture, so practical yet so meaningful coming from him, touched me deeply. "I think that would be wonderful, Dad." As I drove home that night, I reflected on the strange journey that had brought us here. How my family had called me lazy until my sister needed the cure only I could give. How a medical crisis had forced a reckoning that might never have happened otherwise. How forgiveness had become not just a gift I gave others, but a freedom I gave myself. The road ahead would still have its challenges. EDS had no cure, only management. Family dynamics, though improved, would always have their complications. But for perhaps the first time since my symptoms began at 15, I felt a sense of peace with both my body and my place in my family. Not because everything was fixed, but because the truth was finally acknowledged. Have you ever had to forgive someone who took years to believe your pain, or found yourself in a position to help someone who had hurt you? I would love to hear your experiences in the comments below. And if this story resonated with you, please like, subscribe, and share it with someone who might need to feel less alone in their invisible battle. Remember that sometimes our greatest wounds become our most powerful gifts to others. Thank you for listening to my story, and may you find healing in whatever challenges you face.